If you're watching this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't come around often, and you'll want to see every chapter unfold. Like the video and drop a comment below to share your thoughts on what justice really means, because your opinion matters. At 22, he had a life that felt normal. Simple routines, family he loved, friends he trusted. Dreams were just beginning to take shape, and the future felt wide open. But life can change in an instant. The phone call came late at night, shattering the calm of an ordinary evening. Police were at the door. Confusion turned quickly into terror. They said he was a suspect in a brutal crime, a crime he didn't commit. He tried to explain, tried to reason, tried to call anyone who could verify his alibi, but none of it mattered. The accusation carried weight, and the machinery of the justice system moved faster than the truth could catch up. If you're still watching, make sure to like this video and comment your first reaction. Could you imagine being taken from your life, accused of something so serious you'd face death, and knowing you were innocent? Let us know below. Your thoughts matter, and we read every comment. The trial began quickly. Lawyers came and went, papers shuffled, and the gavel's weight seemed heavier than the evidence, or lack of it. Witness testimonies conflicted. Forensic reports were thin, circumstantial. Yet the verdict arrived: guilty. Death sentence. For a crime he had never committed. The shock was instantaneous. His family, watching from the courtroom, could not believe the words. Faces that had been familiar became masks of despair. Friends whispered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Every instinct told him it was a mistake, yet the sentence was official. There was no immediate escape. This is the moment when the emotional toll begins. If you're still here, hit that like button to support stories like this being shared. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. He was moved to death row, a world he had only heard about in news stories or seen on TV. The first night alone in a cell was worse than anything he could have imagined. Walls too close, a small cot that seemed to shrink under him, and the realization that the outside world had no place for him anymore. Every sound in the hallway, the clanging of doors, the distant echo of guards' footsteps, felt magnified. Time stretched painfully. He realized quickly that life here was not measured in hours or days, but in survival. Family visits were limited. Letters were monitored. Phone calls even more restricted. The separation tore at him, and the helplessness of not being able to protect himself or reach loved ones was a constant weight. You might be watching right now thinking about how terrifying that must have felt. Drop a comment below if you can imagine waiting decades for justice, because this story is going to push you to the edge of empathy. In the early days, he clung to hope. Hope that lawyers would find a mistake, that evidence proving innocence would surface, that someone would see the truth. But hope is fragile when the world outside continues moving forward and the system inside moves with relentless bureaucracy. Each day spent behind bars is another day that hope is tested. Cellmates offered a window into what life on death row would really mean. Some were guilty men resigned to their fate. Some were like him, unlucky, trapped, and questioning reality. Conversations were cautious, often loaded with the unspoken understanding that survival here depended on patience, mental resilience, and knowing when to speak or remain silent. If you're following this story, hit the like button right now to support sharing real human stories. Share it with someone who you think needs to see what life on death row can really feel like. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll go even deeper into his decades-long fight for freedom. The first months were the hardest. Sleep was irregular. Anxiety ruled every hour. Every sound could signal bad news. He replayed the courtroom in his mind endlessly, trying to understand how a system meant to protect him could turn against him. Nights blurred into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Family and friends outside were not spared either. Parents grew older before their eyes. Siblings matured in a world where their brother was not free to grow with them. Friends drifted away, unable to handle the emotional weight. The community was divided, some convinced of his guilt despite evidence to the contrary, others campaigning tirelessly for his exoneration. As he faced the first year of his sentence, he realized that the real punishment was not just the potential of death, but the indefinite suspension of life itself. Each passing day forced him to confront the fact that he was losing decades of life while the outside world carried on. If you're still watching, hit that like button and leave a comment. What would you do if you were wrongly accused of a crime and faced death for it? Share your thoughts. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people who need to understand the human cost of wrongful convictions. Even the legal system, which was supposed to protect him, felt distant. Appeals moved slowly. Lawyers came and went. Evidence that could have cleared him earlier was ignored or delayed. The realization that justice was not guaranteed, that time was both an enemy and a weapon, sank in like a cold stone. As months became years, the initial shock evolved into a heavy resilience. He had to find ways to survive psychologically. Reading, writing, memorizing, small routines. Anything to keep his mind from breaking. Even small acts of control, like organizing possessions in his cell or perfecting a daily schedule, became essential. Cellmates became mirrors of the possible futures. Some went mad. Some hardened. Some simply surrendered to despair. Observing them was both a warning and a lesson in survival. The environment shapes behavior in ways few can imagine unless they've been there. If you're still here, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss Chapter 2, where we dive into decades of confinement, the fight for justice, and the psychological toll that can't be undone. Drop a like right now if you care about justice, truth, and the lives affected by wrongful convictions. Share this story with your friends and family to raise awareness. These stories need to be seen, talked about, and remembered. In the first year, letters from family became lifelines. Each word carried love, hope, and sometimes desperation. Phone calls were brief, but each one brought a small connection to a world that otherwise felt unreachable. He clung to these moments because they reminded him that life outside still existed, even if he couldn't touch it. The injustice of his situation, the knowledge that he faced decades for something he didn't do, began to crystallize. It wasn't just the sentence. It was the system that allowed a mistake of this magnitude to persist. The realization that he might spend his entire adult life fighting for freedom shook him to the core. As the chapter closes, remember to like, comment, and share this story with anyone who needs to understand the human cost of wrongful convictions. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the fight isn't over yet, and the story gets more intense as we move into the next chapter. Your support helps amplify these voices and make sure the world doesn't forget. Because this story isn't just about one man. It's about the consequences of a system that can fail, the resilience of the human spirit, and the decades of waiting that shape lives forever. If you're still watching, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button. Every share helps bring this story to the world, and you won't want to miss the chapters ahead. This story gets heavier, deeper, and more emotional. The first months on death row were brutal. The walls were gray, cold, and unyielding. The cot felt smaller than it was, and the tiny window offered nothing but a sliver of the outside world he could no longer touch. Every sound, the clang of metal doors, the footsteps echoing down the tier, the muffled shouts from other cells, was magnified, impossible to ignore, a constant reminder that freedom was not just distant, it was gone. If you can imagine being trapped in a small cell for decades, hit that like button now and comment your thoughts below. Could you survive mentally in a place where every day feels endless and every moment is controlled by someone else? Let us know. The emotional toll started almost immediately. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came only in fits and starts. Dreams were filled with courtrooms, flashing images of the crime he didn't commit, and replaying moments of disbelief over and over. Anxiety became his constant companion. He learned quickly that ignoring it was impossible. Instead, he had to coexist with fear, uncertainty, and anger, all while pretending to the outside world, and even sometimes to himself, that he was coping. Family visits were limited and tightly controlled. The first time his mother saw him after the trial, her face was a mixture of grief, disbelief, and unspoken guilt. His siblings struggled to process decades that they would lose with him. Each visit ended too soon, leaving him with a hollow ache that no conversation could fill. If you're watching this, don't just scroll. Hit like and subscribe now. Share this story with your friends and family. You won't believe how life behind bars changes a person, especially someone who is innocent. Every interaction, every sound, every hour becomes a tool for survival or a weapon against your mind. He quickly realized that time in prison doesn't move the same way it does outside. Days stretched endlessly. Weeks blurred into months. Birthdays came and went without notice. Life outside the walls moved on, but inside, it felt like he was suspended in limbo. He was forced to watch friends and peers age while he remained trapped in a frozen reality. The psychological toll began to compound. At first, he clung to hope, appeals, lawyers, procedural errors that might save him. But the more time passed, the more fragile hope became. Each failed appeal was a new wound. Each delay was a reminder that the system could be indifferent, cruel, and slow-moving. Cellmates became an unexpected part of survival. Some were guilty men hardened by life on death row. Others, like him, were fighting their own battles with circumstance, mistakes, or injustice. Conversations were careful. Trust was earned slowly, and vulnerability could be fatal, emotionally or even physically. Still, some bonds formed that carried emotional weight decades in the making. If this story is gripping you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button and leave a comment. What would you do if you had to rely on strangers for trust and human connection in one of the most extreme situations imaginable? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how his fight for justice begins to unfold. Routine became everything. Every day had to be predictable to keep his mind from cracking. Reading became a lifeline. Writing in secret, memorizing every detail about the prison, planning small mental exercises. These became the scaffolding that kept him from falling apart. Even small acts of autonomy, like arranging possessions in a certain way or choosing how to spend time in the dayroom, were victories against the crushing powerlessness around him. Over the years, he witnessed executions. Not directly, but the absence of people who once shared a tear was palpable. The loss of life, the silence that followed, became reminders of mortality in a place where waiting was punishment itself. Watching others vanish, whether by execution or transfer, reshaped his understanding of survival. It wasn't just staying alive, it was enduring mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Family and friends outside experienced their own trauma. Parents aged before their eyes. Siblings grew up without the presence of a brother who should have been there. Letters became lifelines. Calls became lifelines. But distance and bureaucracy made these small gestures feel inadequate. The injustice rippled outward, touching lives that never committed a crime but paid a heavy price. If this chapter has you gripped, hit that like button, comment, and share this story. Every interaction helps shed light on the human cost of wrongful imprisonment. Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss the next chapter, where the mental and emotional toll deepens and the fight for justice takes center stage. As months turned into years, he learned to adapt to the small rhythms of death row life. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent, how to eat, sleep, and move without drawing attention, how to preserve a sense of self when the system tried to strip it away entirely. But adaptation does not erase suffering. Loneliness was relentless. The sense of lost time was overwhelming. Watching life pass outside these walls became its own kind of torture. Even when good news arrived, small victories and appeals, minor legal technicalities, the joy was tempered by the knowledge that freedom was still a distant, uncertain dream. If you've stayed with this story, don't just watch silently. Like, comment, and share. It matters. Share it with someone who cares about justice, human rights, or the incredible endurance of the human spirit. Subscribe and ring the bell, because the next chapter goes even deeper into the mental and emotional toll, the strategies of survival, and the bonds formed in decades of wrongful imprisonment. Every day spent behind bars reinforced a hard truth. Survival on death row is not about avoiding death. It's about enduring life when life itself has been stolen. Small victories, completing a book, writing a letter, remembering a memory, became lifelines in a place designed to strip hope away. By the end of the first decade, the prison had changed him in ways subtle but permanent. He was no longer the young man arrested in error. He had learned the language of survival, the habits of isolation, the quiet mental fortitude required to endure a life on death row. Yet the longing for freedom, for justice, and for recognition of his innocence never faded. If you're still with this story, hit the like button, leave a comment on what you think he must have felt in these years, and subscribe to follow the journey. Share this with anyone who might question the cost of wrongful convictions or the resilience of the human spirit. This story isn't just his. It's a lesson for all of us on patience, injustice, and survival. Decades would pass, each carrying its own weight, each a test of endurance, until the fight for justice would finally reach the center stage. But that is a story for the next chapter. For now, remember, life on death row is not just about punishment. It's about surviving a world that has already declared your life expendable, while holding on to hope that one day, truth will prevail. If you're still here, make sure to hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to follow this story to the very end. This chapter will take you deeper than ever before into what life on death row truly does to the human mind. You won't want to miss it. Every detail matters. Every second counts. Years on death row are not measured in days or months. They are measured in mental endurance, emotional resilience, and the slow erosion of hope. By the third decade, he was no longer just a man waiting to be executed. He was a living study in the psychological impact of wrongful imprisonment, a mind under relentless pressure. Sleep had become a fragile commodity. Nights were filled with vivid nightmares, trials replayed, family members crying. The crime he did not commit over and over again. Waking up didn't bring relief. The anxiety carried into the day, manifesting as tension, irritability, and constant vigilance. Every footstep, every clang of a door, every distant voice became amplified, signaling danger even when none existed. If this is hitting you, make sure to hit like, comment what you think you'd do in this situation, and subscribe to continue witnessing his journey. Share this with someone who needs to understand the emotional cost of wrongful imprisonment. Isolation magnifies everything. In his early years, interaction with cellmates offered some relief. Over time, however, he began to withdraw. Emotional attachment was dangerous. Too many people on death row vanished without warning, either executed, transferred, or succumbing to despair. Forming bonds meant preparing to lose them, and the mind cannot endure repeated losses without cost. Mental strategies became essential. Reading, writing, and memorization were more than hobbies. They were lifelines. Creating structure in a world stripped of control was survival. He wrote letters that may never be sent, kept meticulous records of events that felt fleeting, and studied endlessly. Each small act of agency restored a fragment of his humanity. If you're still watching, pause for a moment to reflect. Imagine decades of life dictated by someone else's perception of you. Comment below how you think you'd cope. Hit like if you want to support raising awareness about wrongful convictions. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the story only gets more intense. The mind, under this constant pressure, begins to adapt, but adaptation carries its own cost. Hypervigilance becomes second nature. Anxiety becomes chronic. The simplest social interaction can trigger a cascade of fear and overthinking. The human brain is remarkably resilient, but resilience does not erase trauma. It merely finds ways to endure it. He witnessed executions from afar, a cruel reminder of mortality and the fragility of life. Each loss of a fellow inmate was a psychological shockwave. The silence that followed an execution, the absence where a life once existed, was deafening. It left imprints on the mind that could not be erased, teaching lessons in grief, fear, and the fragility of existence. Family connections outside the prison were also strained by the years. Parents aged before his eyes, siblings faced milestones he could not share, and friends grew distant under the weight of decades-long separation. Letters and rare phone calls became the only tether to life outside, yet even those were limited, monitored, and often delayed. If you're still here, like this video, leave a comment about what you'd miss most if you were trapped in his situation, and subscribe to follow the story until justice is finally served. Share it widely so others can witness the human cost of wrongful imprisonment. By the third decade, identity itself became fragile. He was no longer the young man arrested at 22. Time, confinement, and systemic neglect had reshaped him. Yet he was still him, the man fighting to prove innocence, holding on to hope despite every setback. The tension between the self that existed before and the self surviving within these walls created profound internal conflict. Every day required emotional calculation. Too much vulnerability could lead to mental collapse. Too much detachment could erode humanity. Striking a balance became an art, one he learned out of necessity. Cellmates, guards, even routines, all became part of a delicate ecosystem that shaped mental survival. Friendships were cautious, conversations measured, silence a strategy as much as a punishment. Observing behavior became a survival skill. Emotional armor grew thick, often at the expense of spontaneity and joy. If you're still watching, don't scroll. Hit like, subscribe, and comment on what you think the human mind can endure. Share this video to make people aware of the psychological consequences of decades of wrongful imprisonment. Hope remained a fragile thread. Appeals and legal motions arrived slowly, often with setbacks that felt cruelly timed. Success was rare, temporary, and often hollow. Each delay reminded him that the system was indifferent to decades of life already lost. Yet hope persisted, because surrendering entirely meant psychological death long before the physical. Isolation, stress, and uncertainty slowly eroded physical health. Chronic anxiety led to tension, headaches, and fatigue. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, and lack of medical care amplified the psychological toll. The body reflected the mind, aging prematurely under the relentless strain of living in a place designed for punishment, not healing. If you're still following, like this video and subscribe for more. Comment below on what coping mechanisms you think could survive decades in confinement. Share this story to raise awareness about the human cost of wrongful convictions. Religion, meditation, and mental exercises became essential for maintaining hope. Some turned inward to faith, others to intellectual pursuits. Each strategy offered temporary relief, yet none could erase the decades of stolen life, the emotional damage, or the haunting awareness that freedom could remain a distant dream indefinitely. Witnessing injustice over decades shaped his worldview. The realization that the system could fail so profoundly left lasting marks. Anger, sorrow, and disbelief coexisted alongside hope, creating a complex mental state unique to those who survived decades under a death sentence for a crime they did not commit. If you're still here, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what you think it feels like to be trapped in decades of uncertainty. Share this story with others to amplify awareness of wrongful imprisonment and the resilience of the human spirit. By the end of this chapter, the mind has endured decades of stress, trauma, and anticipation. But the most critical phase is still ahead, fighting for justice, navigating legal battles, and holding on to hope as the world outside slowly changes while he remains trapped inside. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, where the fight intensifies, emotions run high, and decades of patience are tested in the relentless pursuit of truth and freedom. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share this video so you don't miss a moment of this incredible, real-life story. If you're still with us, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what happens next is the heart of this story. The fight for justice after decades on death row isn't just legal. It's emotional, psychological, and deeply human. Comment below if you've ever felt powerless and share this story to let others know what real injustice looks like. Decades behind bars had taught him one thing: hope alone wouldn't save him. The system had already failed him once, and relying on luck was dangerous. He needed strategy, allies, and persistence. Lawyers came and went. Appeals were filed and denied. Evidence that could prove his innocence was overlooked, dismissed, or delayed. Every day brought the same frustration. The law moved painfully slowly, while life ticked away outside. The legal battle became a part of daily life. Reading case files, writing letters, communicating through lawyers. Each small step forward felt monumental, but setbacks were crushing. After 20 years of waiting, a new legal team took on his case. They examined every document, every witness statement, every minute detail. It was painstaking work, but finally, cracks in the case began to appear. If you're following this story, don't scroll past. Like this video, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Could you imagine fighting for your freedom for decades while facing a system that already declared you guilty? Share this video to raise awareness of the human cost of wrongful convictions. Public attention became another weapon in his fight. Advocacy groups, innocence projects, and investigative journalists picked up his story. Media coverage shone a light on the flaws in his trial, highlighting withheld evidence and inconsistent witness testimonies. Suddenly, a fight that had been largely invisible began to reach outside the walls. This attention brought hope, but also pressure. The spotlight is both protective and exposing. Family members felt renewed hope, but also relived decades of pain. Friends who had drifted away returned, cautious yet supportive. Even the prison staff noticed the attention. The world outside was watching, and that awareness subtly shifted how the system treated him. If this chapter is gripping you, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. How far would you go to fight for your freedom if your life depended on it? Share this story to amplify the voices of the wrongfully imprisoned. As evidence was reviewed, the legal team uncovered crucial flaws. Eyewitness misidentifications, overlooked alibi details, and suppressed reports began to paint a very different picture than the one presented at trial. These discoveries reignited hope, but also reminded him of the time lost. The 30 years he had spent behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Emotions ran high. Each victory in court brought relief, but each setback returned despair tenfold. Living in the tension between hope and disappointment became exhausting. Yet he pressed on, because surrendering was not an option. Survival had taught him resilience. Fighting for justice demanded it. If you're watching, make sure to hit like, comment your thoughts on this fight, and subscribe. Every engagement helps this story reach the world. Share it widely so more people understand the decades-long struggle of the wrongfully imprisoned. The family's support remained vital. Parents, siblings, and friends were pillars in the emotional storm. They attended hearings, lobbied for media attention, and maintained contact through letters and calls. Their presence reminded him that life outside continued, and that his fight mattered to more than just himself. Court hearings were tense. Lawyers presented new evidence. Judges listened, sometimes skeptical, sometimes attentive. Each hearing was a roller coaster of hope and anxiety. Years of preparation collided with moments that could decide life or death in minutes. The psychological toll was immense, but his determination never wavered. Support networks grew beyond family. Activists, journalists, and fellow advocates provided both practical assistance and emotional reinforcement. They attended hearings, wrote articles, and petitioned officials. Each new ally amplified his voice, creating pressure for a system that had been complacent for decades. If you're still here, don't just watch. Hit like, comment what you think of his fight, and subscribe to witness the conclusion of his incredible journey. Share this video to spread awareness about wrongful convictions and the perseverance required to overcome them. Finally, after decades of relentless legal battles, the breakthrough arrived. Evidence that had been suppressed was finally admitted. Witness testimonies were re-examined. The inconsistencies in the prosecution's case were undeniable. After 30 years of waiting, a court finally recognized his innocence. The verdict was overturned. Freedom, which had been postponed for so long, was within reach. The announcement was surreal. Emotions flooded in simultaneously: relief, disbelief, joy, sorrow for the years lost, and gratitude for those who never gave up. Family members wept openly, friends embraced him with unrestrained emotion, and even those who had been distant returned to witness the moment. If you're still watching, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment how you would feel being released after 30 years behind bars for a crime you didn't commit. Share this story with your network to highlight the human impact of wrongful convictions. As he walked out of the prison gates, the world felt different. Simple things, sunlight on the face, the sound of traffic, the smell of fresh air, were overwhelming in their normalcy. Decades of deprivation made every sensation sharper, every moment more precious. But freedom came with its own challenges. Adjusting to a world that had changed drastically, reconnecting with people who had aged, and processing the trauma of 3 decades of unjust confinement. He became a symbol, not just of wrongful imprisonment, but of perseverance and hope. His story was told in news articles, documentaries, and public talks. Others in similar situations found inspiration. Advocates used his case to push for reforms, arguing that the system could fail spectacularly if left unchecked. Even after release, the psychological toll lingered. Trauma does not vanish with freedom. Memories of confinement, lost time, and constant uncertainty remained. Therapy, community support, and self-care became essential. Healing was slow, but possible. If you're still here, like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to follow the final chapter, where we explore the aftermath, healing, and how a life stolen for 30 years is rebuilt. Share this story widely, so the world remembers both the injustice and the triumph of the human spirit. His fight for justice reminds us all, no matter how long the road, perseverance can overturn even decades of wrongful punishment. but it also forces society to ask hard questions about systems that allow such injustices to persist for decades. This chapter closes with one truth. The legal system can fail, but hope, advocacy, and resilience can prevail, even after 30 years. And the story isn't over yet. If you've stayed with this story this far, don't leave now. Hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so you can witness every detail of his life after release. What comes next is not just about freedom. It's about decades of lost time, emotional trauma, and the journey to reclaim a life stolen by injustice. The day of release began like any other in the prison, yet it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The cell that had been home for 30 years was finally empty. Guards escorted him to the gates, but the weight he had carried for decades did not vanish with the turning of a lock. Every step toward freedom was both liberating and surreal. Outside, the world had changed. Streets, cars, and buildings looked unfamiliar. Sounds were louder. Smells were sharper. The air was different. Every sensation reminded him that 30 years had passed. His family, friends, and advocates waited anxiously, their emotions raw and visible. Tears flowed freely as hugs were exchanged. 3 decades of separation condensed into one overwhelming moment. If you're watching this, hit like and subscribe. Comment below how you would feel stepping into freedom after decades of wrongful imprisonment. Share this story to make others understand the emotional weight of a life lost to injustice. Adjusting to freedom was not easy. The simplest tasks, walking down a street, using a phone, grocery shopping, were alien. Technology had evolved. Society had shifted. People he knew had grown older or passed away. There were achievements he had missed and milestones he would never reclaim. The world had moved on without him, leaving him to navigate a life he had not lived. Family dynamics were complex. Parents aged, siblings had families, and friends had their own paths. Reconnecting required patience and understanding. Even with love and support, guilt and grief lingered. Family members mourned the years stolen from him, while he mourned the time lost and the experiences he could never recover. Cellmates and fellow inmates he had bonded with remained behind bars. Their absence was a constant reminder of injustice and survival. The psychological scars of death row lingered, the isolation, the fear, the mental vigilance that had become second nature. Recovery from decades of confinement required therapy, support groups, and time. Lots of time. If you're still watching, hit like, comment what you think it would feel like to rebuild life after 30 years in prison, and subscribe to make sure you see the full story unfold. Share this story with your friends and family to raise awareness about wrongful convictions. The community also felt the ripple effects. Media coverage amplified his story, and people across the USA, UK, and Canada followed his journey. Some expressed outrage at the decades-long miscarriage of justice. Others celebrated his perseverance. Advocacy groups used his case to push for reforms, citing the enormous human cost of wrongful convictions. Public speaking and interviews became part of his life. Sharing his story was cathartic but exhausting. Each recounting brought back memories of despair, hope, and survival. Each retelling reminded the world that freedom is priceless but cannot undo lost decades. He became a symbol, a living testament to both human resilience and the flaws in the justice system. If you're still engaged, like this video, comment on what you think the system should do to prevent wrongful convictions, and subscribe to follow real-life stories like this one. Share widely. This story needs to be seen and remembered. Psychological trauma was not limited to him. Family members experienced delayed grief, guilt, and relief simultaneously. Friends struggled with reconciling the person they had lost for decades with the person now returned. Mental health support became crucial, as the weight of lost time and the emotional fallout could not be ignored. Even small daily experiences carried immense emotional weight. Feeling sunlight on the face, walking freely, speaking without barriers. These were victories, but they also highlighted the years that had been stolen. Each moment of freedom was layered with grief for all the moments that could never be reclaimed. If you're watching, hit like and comment how you think you would cope after decades behind bars for something you didn't do. Subscribe to witness more stories of perseverance, survival, and the human cost of injustice. Share this video to make people aware of the emotional weight of wrongful imprisonment. The legacy of his wrongful imprisonment extended far beyond him. Legal systems were examined, advocacy groups gained momentum, and policies were questioned. Every day spent behind bars had reshaped his body, mind, and spirit, and the lessons of his life became a powerful tool for social awareness. Family members, friends, and the public were left with profound questions. How could the system fail so completely? How do we prevent this from happening to others? What responsibility does society have toward those wronged? These questions did not disappear. They lingered, shaping conversations and actions long after his release. If you're still watching, don't leave without liking, commenting, and subscribing. Share this story to ensure the world never forgets the human cost of wrongful convictions. Every engagement helps raise awareness and prevent future injustices. Even after freedom, the journey of healing was ongoing. Therapy, community support, personal reflection, all became tools for reconstructing a life disrupted by decades of confinement. The emotional scars did not vanish, but they were managed, slowly transforming pain into resilience, despair into advocacy, and trauma into purpose. Looking back, he understood that life on death row had changed him forever. But in reclaiming his freedom, he also reclaimed agency, voice, and dignity. His story served as a testament to the enduring human spirit, the possibility of justice, even delayed, and the power of perseverance. The story closes with a call to action, for awareness, for reform, and for empathy. If you're still watching, like this video, subscribe, and comment how you would fight for justice if you were in his place. Share widely to make the world see the cost of wrongful imprisonment and the resilience required to survive it. Because in the end, this is more than a story of one man. It's a reminder that freedom is precious, justice is essential, and hope can endure even when life seems lost for decades.